Aloha, everyone. We're just letting people in. Thank you so much for joining us. Aloha, everyone. We're just going to give it another minute or two just to get some people in, but I do want to be mindful of time. So we will just start it in a couple of minutes. Thank you. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining. We are going to go ahead and get started here. Mahalo. Thank you for joining us on our grant writing do's and don'ts. Just a couple of notes. If you need any sort of captions or translations, there's a button at the bottom that you can click to show your captions and select your language if you need to do that. And then without further ado, I just want to introduce our panelists for today. We have G from Maui United Way, who's our Director of Impact. And we have Kay Hamara from Hawaii Community Foundation for, she's a program officer. And we are just gonna go ahead and get right into it. They have a great presentation and we'll follow it up with some Q&A. If you have any additional questions, please feel free to put them in the chat and we'll keep those monitored as well. We'll try to answer as many as possible. And then if we don't get to them, we'll try and circle back at another time and maybe get to those via email. So ladies, take it away.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Lindsay. It's so good to have everybody here. We're really excited to be here to present. Again, my name is G. I'm with Maui United Way, and I have a background in grant writing from different organizations in the nonprofit sector for the last 20 plus years. So I'm really happy to, be able to present this information with you all, and hopefully, build stronger grant proposals for our community and move forward. How do you want to introduce yourself?
You're on mute, Kehao.
I think you're on mute. Yeah.
Look at me, just starting out the day right. Kehao Meyer, Senior Program Officer at the Hawaii Community Foundation. Still learning how to press my unmute button. I will move us on to our agenda for the day.
So for our time together today, and you all will receive this slide deck afterwards. I think actually Lindsay's going to already put it in the chat for us. So feel free to take notes on it or whatnot, but our plan is to kind of have quick introductions and a disclaimer, talk about our key roles and grant processes and what the key roles are that people hold, talk about aligning impact, identifying the need, following the different grant structures within the grant writing, breaking down the financials, and we'll actually provide a sample and a walkthrough during that process. Discuss kind of reasons for denial, writing to scale and making sure that that your writing kind of aligned with the work that you've done, as well as the trust that you've built with the granting organization. And then discussing a little bit more about trust building, some final tips. Some of those tips are also, in this slide deck were presented in the grant basics training that we did a few months back. And then last but not least, kind of move into the questions and discussions. Next slide, please.
So we'll do just really quick introductions of ourselves. I'm Kehal Meyer, Senior Program Officer at the Hawaii Community Foundation. I've currently been working on the incredible kuleana of supporting the Maui recovery effort. Otherwise, I've been at Hawaii Community Foundation for about 6 years, working on a variety of programming, private foundations, Hawaii Children's Trust Fund, some community grants, all different sizes, and of course, I know a lot of people from the Hawaii Tourism Authority grants I managed for on and off about a decade.
Thank you, Gail. Well, she's definitely, the rock star when it comes to a lot of this stuff. But my name is Gia. I'm the Director of Impact at Maui United Way, and I've been here for about a year. Prior to then, I worked at Hale Makua and some other nonprofit organizations like IMUA, and was the Executive Director for Hawaii Nature Center for about 5 years. Prior to that, between Oahu and Maui. Yeah, let's move on to what we're doing. So important disclaimer, following the do's and don'ts that we're going to discuss around here does not guarantee, obviously, that your grant application will be approved because the funding decisions are ultimately at the discretion of the grantor. But, we do think it's important to demystify, what that looks like and have an opportunity to have that discussion and make it so that it doesn't feel so intimidating. So really the purpose of this is really to share those best practices of what we've experienced on both sides, and then clarifying the roles of the grant process, and then exploring how to align impact with the needs of the community at large.
And then I think as we kind of think about the role we each play in the grant cycle, we wanted to clarify who's who, right? So the grantee, that's obviously the person that's responsible for delivering the outcomes and achieving deliverables. This is the person that's receiving the grant award. The grantor is going to be the person who's providing the funding. So a lot of the times the grantor can be someone like HCF or Maui United Way, who isn't the originator of the funding, but is facilitating it. And a program officer will act as a matchmaker between the applicants and then the funds that they're managing, right? To make sure that there's a best match made. And then the donor, of course, is the source of that financial support. So sometimes that's going to be individuals, sometimes it's a collective pooled fund, sometimes it's a foundation, a private foundation in our case sometimes, or the government. We'll manage contracts and whatnot. And so, it's really important to understand how all these people play a role in your grant cycle.
So another really important thing to consider is, having aligned impact. So the impact, what impact are you seeking to make in the community? Taking a look at what the purpose of the grant that you're writing is, why you're writing it, focusing on the outcomes that align with both the funder's mission and the community's needs, right? So that means you're not just, deciding, oh, the community needs X, Y, and Z when there's no data or no understanding of what that is, or that because I want to do it, right? It's because there's been a need that's been identified within the community that you can really speak to and really understand and share out to the funder, and share that as something that you are seeing not just within your eyes, but within the eyes of the community at large. And then really focusing on that impact, right? So emphasizing the long-term change and the measurable success that the program will provide for the community at large.
And I think aligned to that, a message that I've kind of helped people with over time is like, you can't want it the most. It has to be the community needing it the most. For that impetus for why you're even coming forward to write an application or starting this nonprofit or continuing the mission of your nonprofit, right? It's really making sure that that community impact is the pico of all of that work. And that's a great transition to identifying the need. And so thinking about what is informing the need for the project that you want to write an application for. And so, there are sources of information that reviewers are going to look for, right? Are you displaying or demonstrating community feedback? Was there a conversation, a gathering, a survey, right? Where was there community meetings that had really incredible feedback provided? Those are great forms of information. Is there a formal ask? Did a community come together and say, we really need a performing arts studio? Or, did they come and say, hey, we need after school programming, right? Or maybe it's a past performance. You've done 20 years of this work, the need is still present, you still have a wait list every year, right? And then other verifiable data, right? And oftentimes that's going to be census information, maybe surveys that people have done and shared out, focus groups, those are things. It cannot just be a hunch, right? And then thinking about clarifying the reality of the situation or the program that you're in, right? Or you're presenting. Is this program a need to have, or is it a nice to have, right? And a lot of times we're looking for impact, and impact is always usually aligned to need to have, right? This is what's going to make the greatest change or the greatest impact for the community. And then think about what justification you have for that need, right? Was it a great idea you had one day? Or was it an idea that came because you were observing community, you were listening to people, it was a collective determination that this needed to be resolved? And so using this data, pairing that with storytelling, right? There is power in testimony, right? It doesn't always have to be like nerd level data. A lot of times we want to see a realistic illustration of what's actually happening on the ground. And so pairing actual verifiable data and stories that are going to help draw the picture of what you're trying to solve for, that's really your best case scenario. G, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, I think that that balance is really critical, right? So having one story, right, can be a great thing to add, but having the collective data showing, right? So for instance, recently, Maui United Way worked to get gas cards out to the community, and we used data from St. Vincent de Paul and Vision Link, and it showed that there was a specific gap for a specific number of people who were living, on one side or the other. And then we were able to add that data to a testimonial, right? And so that kind of balance of the mo'olelo and the story and the feelings behind things, as well as the data that really supports that, I think is a really great way to approach really informing that need for the project within the community and to your funders, because you also have to remember that as a grant um, as a grant reviewer, you're getting a group of different people who are looking at things from a very different lens, right? So there's financial people, there's social workers, there's data analyst people, right? And so you really want to have that holistic approach when you look at this and identify the need, so that when you look at it from all those perspectives, it shows the return on investment, from a social standpoint, from a financial standpoint, all the different aspects.
Yeah. And I think just lastly on the reason we say verifiable is also like a very good example with this Maui recovery, right? We are going through so much information, and a lot of times, the prioritization happens because of the data that's available, right? And so verifying that data, right? We want to trust our community, but we also want to make sure that there's alignment, right? That there's alignment to what a lot of different communities are saying, right? So it can't be one community is saying, oh, everybody wants gas cards, and it's actually really just a very small population. And so that matters, that's helpful for us, but it also helps us understand the scale of the need as well.
I also just want to highlight in that space that that's how we as funders figure out how we prioritize our funds as well, right? And how not just us, but funders in general and donors, right? So it's not just based on what we're feeling. A lot of it is based on the data of what we can see and know will be able to make the most impact with them.
So this is a pretty general grant structure G and I put together just based on our experience, all applications are gonna look and feel a little different, but in general, this is like the core pieces that are going to align across the board. So whether you're applying to one of our programs, the state, the federal government, these are our best practice recommendations for how to really build a really solid core piece of your grant application. And so I'll do number one. And so tell us about your organization briefly, right? I used to have a community organization spend like 4 paragraphs telling me about their founder and the work of their founder. And they lost so much space and time by telling that. It's a very valuable story, but it took away from understanding what they were asking for, right? And so there's a time and place to share that history, but sometimes the main priority is understanding who are you, what is your mission, what are you trying to do, and who are you serving, right? And making sure it's something that an evaluator can find very quickly. And then tell us what you do primarily. What is your purpose in your community? What is the work that you're trying to achieve year in and year out? And then who works there? Tell us who's there, what their, briefly tell us what their skill sets are, or maybe their role that they're playing, the things they've achieved, on a community scale or maybe a professional scale. And then major accomplishments or wins, right? If you've been doing this work for 40 years, go ahead and tell us. We've served 10,000 children. We've offered 400 hours of workshops, give a nice cumulative summary of your major accomplishments or wins. And that's going to really help us understand who we're working with, who's asking for some, for more support, and how we might be able to put maybe more gas in that car to keep it going, right? I will pass to G on program lead.
Thanks, Cal. I think a really important thing to think about that Kehao and I were talking about as we're preparing for this is the importance of remembering that you are the expert in what you're talking about and the organization that you're with, but those who are reading this are not, and to not forget that as you discuss that stuff, right? So within that organizational description, making sure that you're talking about it as if you're talking about it to somebody who's never heard of your organization before, so that they can get a full understanding of what it is that that you do. And then as you go into programmatic need, we had kind of had that discussion previously about kind of the impact and having the data driven important information in that programmatic need. So it's not just, I think this is important, or I want this for the community. Explain, once you understand what the problem is, right? Here's the problem that I see within the community that needs to be solved. Families are having to drive further because they now live in Kula when they were living in Lahaina, and now they have to drive their children back to Lahaina Luna Intermediate. And the average cost that we found through that research that we've done is that it's about $100 a month. That's a gap. So that explains why we're looking for $100, right, a month. And we're not just looking for it for 1 month because kids need to go to school for more than 1 month. We're going to look for it for a period of time. So we're going to do 6 months as a pilot program, right? So the data is there. The problem statement is really clear. The number of people that this has impacted is really clear. It shows I'm not going to be giving a $100 gift card to somebody who lives in Lahaina and was impacted but is still in Lahaina. We're giving those to people that are outside that really the fire impacted their gas consumption, right? So all those things identify that programmatic need. The data is supported in that process. And then I talk about this a lot, and I know Kehal mentioned it, and there's another slide in the back of this slide deck that you can reference, but the SMART goals, right? The who, what, when, where, why, and how, being specific, measurable, making sure that your goals are attainable, right? I can't say I'm going to make sure that there's that nobody needs gas, for the next 6 months because of this initiative, even if if my initiative is successful, right? I can only share what I'm going to do and the number of people I'm going to impact within the work that I'm going to be doing. So making sure that it's really, really clear, end game, timeline, all those different aspects, who's going to be involved, where are your partnerships? That stuff's really, really critical. We're a small island and we cannot have more we cannot be frivolous with how we utilize our funds and our resources, right? So we want to know and see that you all are partnering with other organizations. Who are the other people within the spaces that you're working within? Are you collaborating with them? What does that look like, right? You can see even us, Kehao and I were at two different organizations. Hawaii Community Foundation is a much larger organization, but we see the value of that community building and that collaboration enough to do these things together, right? And then finally, avoiding kind of vague narratives, right? You want concise, impactful sentences. You don't want to go on and on and on, right? Lose the reader or the grant reviewer. You really want to make sure that what you're talking about is clear, concise, and really direct to that programmatic need in that portion of the grant writing. And I will pass it over to Gail for process and timeline.
So now that we know who you are and we know what your need is, we really want to understand what is your process for getting this done, right? What is your goal? How is your goal going to be met, right? And that includes being really specific on your action items, right? Are you holding weekly meetings on Mondays at 4 o'clock? Are you doing monthly gatherings on Saturdays? Right, with a sign up sheet that's going to be available on your website. The process should be very specific and it should include how you're going to get people to engage with you, right? So, whether it's people signing up, people showing up, people benefiting from whatever you're offering. Draw us the map of what you're going to do if the funds were given to you and where you would start, right? So some people will map out month 1, we're doing this, month 2, we're doing this. Some people say months 1 through 3, right? Be as specific as you can be, right? If you are already doing the work and you're just asking for money to kind of reload your work, right? Then just tell us, hey, we've been operating weekly focus groups and we're inviting parents with children ages 1 through 5. Be very, very specific because we need to know, are you inviting everybody? Are you inviting only people that live in Kula? Are you inviting only fire impacted parents, right? These are very specific things that are going to be a part of all of your action items as well. And then a timeline, right? Understanding at what time of year you expect to, if you are going to be kind of building your work or hiring folks, we want to know when you're going to be in each phase of your program, right? And so that's where this process is going to meet timeline, and that specificity goes really, really far.
I was going to mention in that space too, just the importance of really, being that granular. It shows that you've put in the thought that it takes to actually execute and implement, right? And so it's really important because those are the logistics that will need to be played out, and that shows the grantees or the grantors, right? Like that, oh, they've really thought this out and created a process on how they're going to do it. The need has been identified. There's a demand that's clear, and this is how they're going to execute it, right? It would be, I mean, it's kind of like, I think of it like, when I talk to my son, right? It's like, okay, how are you going to, save for this, right? For the shoes that you want or whatever it is. And having him help to, start that plan to prepare for what he needs to make that stuff happen. So really, really critical to be able to show that you've spent the time and you're not just like, hey, I want to do this and it needs money, can you help fund this, right? It's really been thoughtful in how you approach things. Okay.
And just to wrap that up, if you're doing an event, you always need to include a potential or secured location, whether or not a permit is required to hold your event, and the day and time. Because sometimes people get very excited and they miss those like really big things. And so be sure to be as specific as you can.
All right. So, talking about financials, this is probably what I found at least most overwhelming as I started doing grant writing, many years ago, because it's a very different approach to and a different lens to looking at what you're writing for, right? It's not just about the community need; it's really about what it's going to cost to make that happen, and how it looks, and the bookkeeping side of that stuff. So there's a few kind of important areas and words to understand that we've reviewed before in the grant basics, but I'm going to take the time to go through it a little bit with Kehao, and then we'll go through a sample budget, and I'll talk through how we at Maui United Way came up with that specific budget to help you all walk through that. So operating budget, that is your there's an annual operating budget for your organization as a whole. So that's your total yearly budget. And then there's a programmatic operating budget at times as well. So that means within that umbrella of this is what it costs to run Maui United Way, this one specific program, the Molamana Keiki program, is going to cost this much out of that whole umbrella, right? So those are terms that are really important to understand, so you don't submit the wrong thing, so that you understand what it is that you're looking at, and being able to break down within each of the line item categories how much it will cost to do that specific program is very different than what it looks like for you as an organization. Anything to add to that one, Karen?
I would say if you're an org that's small enough, your operating budget may also be your program budget. If you only have one program and you only have like that program is your whole budget for the year. So don't feel like you're doing anything wrong if you don't have multiple programs and a separate operating budget. We do see often the smaller grassroots guys will have a nice like Venn diagram overlap of that.
Great point. And then there's the personnel costs, right? So we're talking about people that are helping you actually implement that program, right? So that's knowing and understanding what their hourly rates are, the number of hours that they're going to be working. Are they full-time, part-time? Are they going to work 20, 30, 40 hours a week? And what their role is within the work that that program is going to that person's going to help to implement the program as a whole, right? So those are direct personnel costs to the program or the project that you're requesting funding for normally. Anything
Yeah.
else on that?
And I would say, personnel costs are program costs, right? If the personnel are on the ground, making sure the program is getting completed every day, every week, right? And so thinking about the difference between someone thinking, oh, I can't have administrative costs means I can't pay my staff. It actually means you're not just paying the CEO and the CFO, you're paying program officers or program managers or volunteer coordinators, right? Those folks are the ones doing the job that the jobs that need to get done to make the program a success. And so a lot of times the executive director will be someone that is on the ground doing the program. Sometimes when organizations get large enough, the executive director is not a part of everyday activities, and that's just how it pans out. So just really think about who are the key people that are going to make sure your program is a success, and those are considered programmatic personnel.
Also, as Kayla was talking about, as an organization gets larger, if the executive director, for instance, is not spending the entirety of their time, but they're spending a portion of their time, it is absolutely okay to earmark a percentage or a certain portion of the costs for that executive director within personnel if they're helping to implement that program, right? So so just things to think about as you figure that out. You don't want to put, for instance, if you have 10 programs, 100% of the executive director's time should not go into that program personnel cost for one grant, right? For one program, for instance. So that's something to keep in mind. And then there's the administrative costs. And this term is defined differently by different funders. So asking is absolutely okay. I think being able to understand what that looks like looks very different. For instance, I've been supporting Kaibigan, and their administrative costs, their maximum is only 3%, right? And so that means they can do 3% specifically, whereas other organizations, the budget that I'm going to show you, the maximum for administrative costs is 15%. So it can vary pretty significantly. This includes accountants, so your bookkeeper, your auditor, keeping the lights on, you know, if it's a portion of a larger facility, other overhead items, you know, to consider within this line item of administrative costs that are not specific to the program in itself. Yeah.
Yep, and then some funders will have a limit that they define in their RFPs or their funding opportunities. So always look for that. If it's not explicitly listed, a safe space is 10 to 15%. Otherwise, you know, some funders will say you're welcome to put what makes sense for you, right? So I would say, you know, it doesn't hurt to call and ask if it really is something that a lot of times your CFO will want to know, you know, a very specific percentage or limit. So that's one area I would say look for explicitly in the funding opportunity or the RFP.
And then, you know, if it is like a lower amount, like 3%, for instance, I think it's also really important to kind of have a discussion because most funders, if it's low like that, know that, oh, you know, you might be able to put some of these costs into personnel or whatever, right? So they have specific ways of like making sure that that what you submit is aligned with what they need. But they also understand and want to support you in getting the work and the program done. So having those kind of conversations are, I think, really, really helpful. It's also a thoughtful conversation. It means that you've thought this stuff over and that you're not just submitting something to submit something, that it's something that you're thinking about. And ultimately that's what it is, right? This is a relationship building opportunity, and having those back and forth conversations shows the investment that you have in making sure that you want to follow the rules and the guidelines that you know, whatever project manager, program administrator has to support you in. Anything else, Cal?
And then I'll move us over to the budget narrative. So, you know, when you're doing a program budget, I know sometimes the line items can get pretty lengthy, especially if you have many, many things you want to include. Sometimes people put very simplified, you know, supplies, transportation, travel, you know, event costs, and that's also okay. But if you're going to have more simplified line items, a budget narrative is a great inclusive document where you can put all of the justifying math, right? Show your math, right? So if you're gonna ask for $10,000 for honorarium for cultural practitioners, we want to know in the budget narrative, are you giving one person $10,000 or are you splitting that among five? Are they all getting 2,000 each? Right. So this is a really good tool to use as an addendum to a very like clean and pretty project budget with very nice line items, just to really clarify why you put 25,000 or why you put $16,526.32. Like sometimes we want to know, how did you get to the 32 cents? You know, it's a really great use of a budget narrative, right? To help us not have to ask questions, right? If we come up with 5 questions because we don't know what we're looking at, the more questions we ask, I think the harder it is to justify funding a program.
I was going to also mention this is a really good place if, for instance, we're asking for $25,000 for cultural practitioners. It would be $1,000 per cultural practitioner. Their normal going rate is $2,000 for a day, but they're giving us a discounted rate of $1,000, right? So providing that context to really understand the work that you've done to, you know, get to that number that you've had is really helpful, because that might not be something that the grant reviewer is aware of in advance. Moving on to the pro tip, aligning funding requests with the funder's limitations and guidelines. Oftentimes, honestly, most of the time, I want to say, I can speak from our United Way, and I think Hawaii Community Foundation, Kehau, you're welcome to share as well. We are the stewards as much as you are the steward, right? And so we have to align the funding requests that are coming into our organization with the limitations and guidelines that multiple different funders may or may not have about what they want their funds to be spent on, right? And so if for instance, we say, oh, sorry, that doesn't fit into our guidelines or our priorities, it's not, me deciding that, right? It's been decided in different ways, in different realms. And so making sure that you do the research and the due diligence for the grant that you are looking for, and ensuring that that your request is aligned with the limitations and the guidelines of that specific grant or that pool of money is really critical. And then ensuring that let's say the application says you can ask up to $10,000. Asking for $20,000 shows that you haven't really thought about and read everything through, for instance, right? So making sure that you understand those limitations and guidelines. Yeah.
Again with my here we go. Yeah, I would also say just making sure that you also see what things are not allowable in general. So I know for our state and our federal applications that we've all experienced, you'll see a laundry list of like 70 things that you can't ask for. Be really clear as you go through your budget that it's in alignment and that nothing is out of the ordinary based on the previous narrative you also wrote. So, for example, say you're asking for a very specific program for kids. You talk all about all the work you're going to do. We get to the budget and we see a line item for like 20 bikes, but you never mention bikes in your narrative. Having something that has no correlation to your narrative is going to be a huge red flag. And we're going to be like, oh, what is the bike? Did they forget they put bikes in, or are they just trying to slip bikes in, right? Really make sure that everything aligns to a need that you've already, or an activity you've already talked about. And that's the last thing I'll say about that. Do you want to jump into your example?
I will, and I'm sorry, I just saw that you were typing for answers for Q&As, and I didn't mean um to switch you out. I'm going to share screen if that's okay. So I did drop the sample in the chat, but I also will share screen a budget template. So this is actually a submitted and funded grant budget template for a very simple. So you have to remember, sometimes it's not this simple. It's this simple because this was, kind of really in the midst of right post fire when we were doing our emergency financial assistance. And we were lucky enough to have a grantee who was willing to fund the administrative costs associated with pushing out that $8 million, six of which came from Hawaii Community Foundation, for in $1,000 increments that Maui United Way administered, right after the wildfires. So you can tell we have our project budget, right? There was loaned executives that came from United Way Worldwide to support us because we didn't want to staff up. And then, obviously after this was POW, it wouldn't be necessary anymore. And so we had a total budget of 155,000. 5,000 of that came from money that we had already received in some way. In kind, so there was donations. The executives actually came and we did not have to pay for those executives to come. So that was, again, within the budget to show that specific amount. And then we requested from the funder $21,450. And you can see in this budget justification narrative what it went to and why. There were 5 executives that came from United Way Network to spend 33 weeks on staff in total, right, combined, at MUW to assist with fire response programming, strategy, and capacity building, and help push out that emergency financial assistance funds. So that's really, really clear on, the full amount and then the ask of this specific funder. And then I did add into here, just so that you all have it. We then, created a specific grant code within QuickBooks for this specific grant. So we'll call this Grant A. We received Grant A and we coded it Grant A. And of that, then we coded $21,450 in QuickBooks under Grant A, under the cost of the loaned executives that we brought in, right? And so, so that way it ties into our financials and shows, and this is how I'm able to send this. This was the final report that was sent out afterwards. The second line item under personnel was our call center staff and volunteer manager. Again, total budget, we had $20,000 in additional other revenue sources. and we were requesting 21,600. And the specifics of that was the distribution of that emergency financial assistance and upcoming disaster response programs requiring the addition of a call center staff member who can recruit and manage the community volunteers that were helping to distribute those funds. So again, that's how we were able to organize, justify, and explain so that it's very, very clear to the funder what we're going to be doing with the funds when it comes to personnel. Again, we're really lucky. This funder specifically wanted to support the administrative costs of actually implementing the program and not just the cost of actually giving it like the $1,000 increments of funds, because it doesn't happen magically, right? And we all are aware of that. It's time and talent and funding to be able to actually actualize something like this.
And then I want to just point out
Yep.
that showing those other revenue sources, even in kind, are so important, because if you are asking for 100% from a funder and you have no other contributions, that's going to be really hard to justify if everybody else that's writing is including other revenue sources. But it doesn't mean you can't be funded if you have no other resources available. If you're starting from zero, it's absolutely okay. But if we know that you got a grant from Maui United Way and you didn't list it, that's something that we also can verify, right? We will also keep track of the announcements that other funders are coming out with, because we really want to amplify the power of leveraging each other's giving, right? And that's a big part of it, right? We want to make sure that we're strengthening every dollar going in with each other. And so that's the collaboration that we use. But also it also makes us know, like, hey, look at you, you're doing a really great job. You're getting a lot of support, right, from community, from getting a lot of donations, right, or you're getting a lot of funders. So we want to also know what relationships are you getting support from, and that's a great story that tells itself right here.
Absolutely, thank you, Cal. Yes, it is really, really helpful to have a full picture and a sense of that stuff, and that you're contributing to something that other people are contributing to that is already successful, or that you think will be successful. If it is something that's already moving forward and going already. And then this other section below is really around the supplies, right? So yes, there was only a portion of the personnel, but we were requesting $4,000 in additional supplies, right? To make that happen with the additional influx of temporary support staff and volunteers. Travel. At this point in time, we hadn't received additional support. We did receive it later on, but to bring in other support, education, and response support that was needed to implement the emergency financial assistance program. So that's earmarked in there. I did not write this one, but I would have probably additionally written out, for what, to where, how much approximately it would cost, because I don't want this to be a $10,000 round trip first class ticket to DC and back again for one person, right? For instance. So I would have specified that a little bit more. Any other training and conferences, right, to prepare for things. Other areas here, equipment, telecommunications, you could have put in if it was expected. Again, if you take a look at this, so that's that indirect overhead expense that we've been talking about, the administrative costs, right? What percentage of that is it compared to the direct expenses? So again, you can tell that this funder is looking to see what percentage are you asking of indirect costs or that admin cost versus what you're actually needing to implement that program, because we look at that percentage as a marker for whether it's a strong proposal or not. And then I think this was being mentioned too, the subcontractors and consultants. So usually personnel, the W-2 employees or others who are in that space are separated out from subcontractors or consultants. So we were going to be contracting out for $142,000 worth of services, 96K of which we were providing to the program, 13 which was donated in kind, and we were requesting from this funder 32,950, and kind of went through what type of positions we were looking to subcontract or consult out, as you can see. And then stipends. We actually had an intern that was really helpful. And so we were requesting support for the intern to continue to support in that space. And then the final kind of cost was in there as well. And then noting the total expenses should be aligned with the total request from that funder. So we requested $95,000 from this funder. And so all of this should add up to that, as you see here. Okay.
Gee, I wanted to really, before we close this up and go back to the PowerPoint, I wanted to answer Deb's question in the Q&A. So she asked about the limitations of funders and how sometimes they may say there's no limit to the request, but then they give a much smaller award to everybody. This is a really complex answer. You know, as program officers, we always try to ask for realistic ceilings. There are some funders who don't want to put anything down in writing. They want to see what you have to offer and then they'll make a decision later. A lot of times the program officers, we get to make our best recommendation for funding, but the final decision is somebody else. In the case of, you know, an average award, we will never really know what the average award is until all the applications are in and everything is considered, right? In general, as a program officer, I like to give as close to the full as possible, the full ask, because we want to make sure that the program can happen. But, you know, there are some situations where we don't have the final decision making because there's a panel of funders or whatnot, and they want to try to give everybody a little bit of something. And that's generally how you end up getting this smaller amount. My personal preference is getting people as close to whole, just so that we know that they can have a successful program, right? But sometimes that decision comes out of like, you have more than enough funds, right? Or we see that you've listed, you have 17 other funders and everybody's secured and you're just looking for more, right? We'll give what makes sense to what we have available and maybe like give more to someone who has a little bit of a gap. But honestly, that is a rarity. That's a really rare situation. The best closest answer is it depends on the funder, right? And it's a case by case. I always tell people, submit what you need to operate the program. You're on not like your Disneyland dream number, but like what do you need to make sure that your program operates and that you're not suffering. And make it very clear, we need this number to operate this program.
And I also think in regards to that, it's really important to remember that, you know, as philanthropists, you know, we're moving towards, and I'm excited to see this concept of trust-based philanthropy, right? So, but that means trust goes two ways, right? And so if I had never met Kehao before, and I went up to Kehao and I said, I want $100 million to be able to do this really great program, I would hope that she would say, "Are you crazy?" Right? And so, what you have to remember is you know, we are looking for relationships, and funders are looking to have a relationship with you. That means make a reasonable ask to be able to get something off of the ground, with the explanation even in your proposal saying, hey, we really wanted to be humble and thoughtful about our approach and intention, and have this be the pilot. And our intention then is to then come back to you, you know, with our successes, and then show to be able to expand upon that, right? And that's a much easier sell for, you know, grant reviewers and boards and everybody else, than to go in really big, and make it seem like, oh wait, you know, these people really haven't thought of this as a whole and holistically to ensure that it's all consistent.
And this is our next really fun topic. Reasons for denial. And so I know we put the note on the bottom, but I want to start by saying denials are never personal, right? It is honestly some of the most most difficult part of this job is the emotional experience we have with going through organizations on this full journey and then not being able to come through, right? Because we've helped you, we've supported you, we've gotten back and forth with emails, and then at the end of the day, we can't get that across the finish line with the peer reviews or the panel or even the individual funders that we work with. That's a really, it's not a personal thing. It's always going to be based on those funder priority areas, risk analysis, and then those budget restrictions, right? But here are some common reasons applications will get denied, right? They're just not aligned with funder priorities. You'll come in and the funder will say, we want to support kids that need to learn how to ride bikes. And you're like, I want to start a baked good program, right? And it's so if it doesn't make sense, if it's just a misalignment, it's not going to score very well. Next is, the application is incomplete, right? Or not compliant, right? If there are mandatory attachments and you don't upload them, that is an incomplete application, right? Do you want to expand on that, G? On non-compliant?
So I think overall, for instance, if you were to submit an application that was, if you're a for-profit and it was for a nonprofit, for instance, right? Or there are applications that, you don't have your DCCA, stuff online ready to go, and, your COGS isn't ready, the certificate for vendor compliance and everything else, right? So those are different reasons why, or you haven't had an audit, so there's lots of different reasons for that sort of thing. But again, that's why it's really important to have all of the due diligence done in advance to ensure that you're kind of prepared and ready to go. But yeah, and again, none of these things, I know Kay's going to get to that. It doesn't mean no forever. It means no, not right now, right? And let's work to figure out how to strengthen your proposal or strengthen your compliance.
Yeah. Unrealistic budgets and timelines. I mean, you guys know how to read. I don't have to read this to you, but just making sure that you guys see, like, these are the reoccurring issues that I will be on a phone call with somebody and walk them through and say, hey, like, your timeline says you're going to get 1,000 people supported. You have 2 staff. You're going to do this in 6 months. Like, the math doesn't math for me, right? Helping people understand what their realistic goals are. You don't have to overpromise, right? You tell us what you can reasonably do, and the impact is what we're looking for, right? And so if you can't demonstrate that you're gonna make an impact, or if you can't demonstrate that how you're gonna measure that, you're not gonna score as highly. If you're looking for 100% from one funder, that's another one, right? Especially if you're asking, or if you keep asking, keep asking, right? And then it doesn't look like you're asking anybody else, right? That's something that funders track. And then organizational capacity, right? I mean, if you've never ever done a grant application and you've never ran a grant program before, please do not come in and ask for $1 million, right? I know that the passion is there. I know that the need is there, but the organization has to have the capacity to operate. And so in these situations, my recommendation will always be, come with what you can do, be really honest about what you can do. And all of these have mitigations or mitigants that we will always be like, hey, this is the fix for this, right? That's why it's really good to have a relationship, right? And that leads us right into writing to scale.
I'm going to answer a quick question that came up around whether like grant people explain whether their why their grant was denied, right? And so some organizations will, and I always highly recommend people to reach back out because it's a learning opportunity, right? I think the analogy I use a lot is it's like fishing, right? Like, okay, that bait didn't work. How come? What was wrong with it? What could I have done better? How could I improve? Right? Not okay, how, why? Like, it's your fault, right? It's more about, what didn't align and fit into the puzzle piece of what you were looking for. What could we tailor, within our asks better? Or was this just not a need that resonated with the funders that you're representing, or the grant reviewers, right?
Yeah.
So I think that's really, really an important aspect
to
remember.
When I was working on the Hawaii Tourism Authority, I had a lot more denials than approvals, but the most valuable experiences as a program officer is spending that one-on-one time, providing people feedback, and then seeing them come back with a better put together application the next year and then getting funded, right? Yes, I've had the situations where people call and they yell at me for 20 minutes. I will sit there, take it, and then we will walk through the constructive portion of that conversation. So I do understand it's passion driven, and so there is, for the most part, most program officers are like G and I, where there is empathy built into that whole experience. I don't know that we have to spend too much time on this page, but it really is writing to the scale of your capacity, right? What you can actually do and get done. Do you want to go through this?
Yes.
Okay.
Do you want to go into the Q&As and answer a couple of those?
Sure.
And then I will go through this one. Sorry.
Okay.
So trust building, like we were talking about through this process, right? Weaving that trust into the application is really, really critical, right? Having consistency. Obviously, Kehao and I talk to each other. Our organizations talk to each other. We have the Funders Recovery Collaborative now that's come together. We're having these conversations because we want our efforts and our funds and our impact to dovetail in with each other, to strengthen the community. So we're looking for you all to do the same thing, right? As grantees, or as grantors, no, grantees, sorry. So be transparent, consistent, and accountable, making sure that what you say is consistent throughout the entire process. If your grant has, or if your program has expanded, then in that grant explain, hey, we've submitted X, Y, and Z to this amount, but we're looking for an expansion because we have this already, right? Having accountability of what's worked and what hasn't. We're fully aware. I mean, I've done direct service before, right? Not every project that you pilot is going to work. Some of it isn't going to work. And saying, hey, we've tried these 4 things and it didn't work, but this thing worked really well. And so we're looking for that process, right? I think there's been plenty of times, honestly, that I've come to Hawaii Community Foundation with grants and said, hey, you know what? Especially during COVID, right? Our plan was A, and now we have to pivot. And it wasn't our intention, but all of these things that are outside of our control impacted what it is. And I think it makes a really big difference for me to go to Hawaii Community Foundation versus Hawaii Community Foundation to be asking me for my grant report, right? At the end of the entire grant cycle and saying, hey, where is it? And for me to be like, oh, sorry, we weren't able to finish it, right? Like it's a very different feeling to create. And you build trust by being transparent like that and consistent in your approach, demonstrating the collaboration and how you avoid, how your work avoids duplication. So again, showing the relationships that you've built. What other organizations work within that space? That's honestly the first question that I know Kehao asks herself, and through the process, I think about it too. Who else is doing what, right? If you are an organization that works with babies and you're looking for a food security grant, I don't need you to be feeding kupuna, right? I have other kupuna organizations that are doing that work, for instance, right? And I want you all to collaborate together to work on those things. And that's just how, honestly, this is how we function within our small community, right? And so if this isn't an option, this isn't an if, this is we have no other choice because we have limited resources. And so we all have to be really thoughtful in how we look at that stuff. And it doesn't mean that, 2 people can't be doing the same work, but how are you dividing and conquering that work, right? How are you making sure that Kehao isn't going to be served twice, for instance, right? So making sure that you can show that it's not duplicative, it's enhancing the work that needs to get done, for instance, is really critical. You want to touch on the other ones, or do you want me to keep going, Kehao?
No, I can do it. Be specific about what you've done and what you plan to do, right? So this is the trust building. Tell me what you've done successfully so far, and then what you plan to do is that continuation of the work, right? That's the consistency we're looking for. So we want to know what value add you've been and how you want to continue to be that that role, that organization for your community. And then that leads to the last one, right? This is how we develop strong relationships in community. And when you can speak to that, and when we hear about that, that's trust with us, right? When we can communicate with people who are like, oh, this org is incredible. They've done so much great work for us. That is demonstrated on the ground, but also in your writing to say, like, we have you can list them all out. We have all of these great partnerships. And oftentimes we will see the overlap of people, promoting each other in their work. And so this is trust building. When we know you're a trusted partner to community, that goes really, really far. And when your community vouches for you, that's really a really good thing. And that's like the letters of support. Those might be little, but they are not little if you are saying this and so homestead is our key partner, right? If they're a key partner in implementation and you have a trusted relationship, a letter of support of them saying, yes, we trust them, we believe in them, we want them here. So powerful to show that relationship.
I'm going to address one of the questions in the chat, which is,
Okay.
do you find it's more advantageous to do multiple grant requests to cover programmatic costs if they are aligned with your program, or to ask one grantor for to fund the program entirely? And I think that's a really good question. I would, and Kale, you're welcome to, to join in. I feel like it just depends on what the funder is looking for. One of the main things I think about is ensuring that as we create the programmatic data and the outcomes and the reporting, I like to, and I think I've talked about this in the grant basics, like have a few themes within the nonprofit organization that you're working with that you're going to look for funding for. And that way, when you share the outcomes, those outcomes can align with the different funders that you're asking for, so that when reporting comes, it's not super stressful. Otherwise, if you're saying I'm going to report on these 5 metrics for this grant and these other 5 metrics for that grant, if you've got 10 different grants that you're managing, that becomes really stressful. But if you can consolidate all of that and say, hey, we're going to provide Hawaii Community Foundation Maui United Way with the same metrics with their different pots of money, then that makes your job a lot easier. So it really depends on your capacity as an organization and the funding that's available. If you need $10,000 and the max for HCF and Maui United Way are $5,000 each, then going for both makes sense. If Hawaii Community Foundation is offering $20,000 and Maui United Way is offering $5,000, then it might make more sense to just go to Hawaii Community Foundation. So it really, it's a choose your own adventure a little bit, and there's a lot of variables in that response. So I hope that helps.
And then some funders will write in their RFPs or their funding opportunities that you must have matching funds, or you must have, 70% or more funded already before you come to them. So always look for that fine detail as well. And I want to recognize the time. We'll stay on, but these are our final tips for you, right? We want to make sure that you understand, tell us who you are, what you've done, gas yourself up. I know as Hawaii people, we really tend to be humble about what we're doing, but this is a good time to just tell us what you've done and all the things you're proud of yourself, right? Be concise, add value through every sentence you write. Be very specific about the impact that you want to make for your community, right? Do you want to see 20 kids learn how to make something, or do you want to see 20 kids have value, see value in themselves by the end of the grant cycle, right? Be very, very specific. And then follow up for denial if necessary, right? If you've been awarded, congratulations. If it's a denial, it's a not yet, it's not right now, but always seek that feedback for learning. And I'm just going to walk us really quickly. I believe G's going to make this available so you can kind of see. These are just some general, recommendations, some strategies. We do have, again, the specific SMART goals, things that you can kind of on your own time kind of think through and apply them as needed, right? G has kindly put together these grant writing resources. These are 8 places and spaces that are helpful to grant writers like yourselves. And
Awesome.
then
Thank you. Yes, now it's questions. And then those, just so everyone knows, those links for the resources, it's also available on the Maui United Way website under the grant resources section. And then this will be available on the website as well. We'll put the recording up as well as any documents, the slides and the budget template as well. So you will always have a place to go back to it, and you can refer anybody back to it if you want to.
Can I just put
But
in a quick plug
yep.
before we go into Q&A time? Just there that the link here for the Maui Recovery Funders Collaborative. This is a really exciting initiative that Hawaii Community Foundation really championed, and Maui United Way is lucky to be a part of. It's honestly something that I've been like dreaming about for years. I'm not gonna lie. The idea of consolidating the funding requests so that you all don't have to put in 10 different grant requests to 10 different funders, right? Let's consolidate this to make this as easy as possible. And so this MauiRecoveryFunders.org is a place where you can submit one application, and multiple funders within this funders collaborative will take a look at it. This is a pilot, and it's specific for the those grants that would fall under fire recovery from the 2023 Maui wildfire efforts. But it's a pilot that, I'm really excited to, hopefully expand out so that it's something that we can utilize during blue sky times, throughout our community and in our state. It will save a lot of time and energy in that reporting and the grant writing and those resources that are available. So I highly encourage you all to check that out.
And I think to highlight the reality of what this year has done is it has forced us to build relationships among funders and build our networks and our partnerships. The same way we're asking everybody to collaborate and be a good partner, we're walking that talk now, right? We are working together. We're now seeing everything in front of, our processes, our discussions are all face to face. And this helps us kind of, keep that accountability. And so people like G and I can challenge each other, we can support each other, we can have those conversations, and then we come to much better decisions, I think, on behalf of the community when you're balancing that that place that we're that opportunity, that space we take, right? When we're talking about, do we fund this or do we fund that, and who can do this and who can do that, right? It keeps everyone connected. So I'm really excited too. We do have a bunch of questions.
Yeah.
Do you want to take the first one?
So I see, yes, the one I see up top is, what's your impression about the amount of available grant funding in Hawaii for nonprofits? Have you noticed it increasing, decreasing the last few years? And are there any trends in philanthropy and donor habits that you wouldn't mind sharing? That's a loaded question. It's a lot of
Actually,
questions. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I would say, so generally speaking, the availability of funds is based on the success of our stock market, to be honest, because these funds are, they're invested. It is a 5% mandated distribution that they all have. So the amount of funds available for the year is contingent upon either one, a fundraising goal for a specific purpose, like Maui Strong Fund, or a private foundation like Atherton or Cook or Baldwin. They have a mandated amount that they have to spend each year. And so that might stay the same. It might increase, it might decrease. It would only decrease if the stock market is just like tanking, or if no one's making donations, right, to a specific pot of funds.
So, yes, I think a lot of funds, because philanthropy is rooted in, the market in so many ways. That is definitely true. I also want to kind of highlight something that it's an unintended, consequence sounds like a bad word, but there was a lot of grassroots organizations after the wildfires where our community, in Maui really, kind of stood up to fill the gaps that were there. And, HCF did an incredible job of supporting many of those grassroots organizations. One of the things that I think is really important for us to remember, and the criticalness of that collaboration is our community is small. We are not Oahu, and we're definitely not the continent, right? We can only like support a certain number of nonprofits. There's board members, there's fundraising, there's galas, there's all these different components to grant writing, right? There is a limited pot that exists. So that's also why that collaboration I think is so critical for us to think about, and why considering a fiscal sponsorship or working together in partnership and collaboration under one nonprofit, right? All of those things make a lot of sense for the long-term sustainability of our organization or of our community as a whole, and the organizations to thrive, right? Making sure that we think about those things as we prepare our grants, I think are going to be really important in the future.
And I think what we're also trying to do is get a scale of how much funding could come from national level foundations and national funding opportunities, and how we introduce our Hawaii organizations into those pools, right? Because I do think we have competitive programs and nation leading programs, especially coming out of this year in Maui. I'm so impressed with what I've been seeing and with the communities they've been able to do, that I would hope that, as we help you build your muscles, that you are applying for those big fish, so to speak, and bringing more money into Hawaii, so that we come from a place of abundance and not competition, right? And that's always the goal, right? To make sure that it's an abundant space and not just a competitive space. I can answer this HCF specific one. So donor advised funds, I would recommend, so there's two different things about donor advised funds. It's really great to get your work out there, right? Social media, newsletters, press coverage, right? Donors that have donor advised funds are looking at those things. They're in community, they're talking to people. So the more good information about what you're doing that's out there and available, the more likely you're going to get noticed by them. And then it's a two-way street. Our donor advised officer, right? They might be able to be like, hey, I saw this organization that's aligned to what you're looking at. And, as you can imagine, there's a lot of competition for attention in that donor advised space. But there's, if you email me directly, I can get you some, a contact at HCF is one person that works with our donor advised funds. They're on Kauai. So it's, it is a small space at the organization. But what helps really is getting your information out there and common, as common knowledge, or as someone that's like a common name that everyone's like, oh yeah, it's that organization. They're great, right? Definitely do it on both sides, not just through the one person making a recommendation, but on the public's facing side too.
And then Kehao, I can answer the GIA question, give you a minute to breathe, and then we can go to the next one. So the question I see is about the state GIAs. Yes, that is in the slide deck of different potentials, and it's coming up really shortly. So the process, the state posts all the application documents on the website. However, there's no information about what entities have been funded through this. There is actually, if you go onto the Grant and Aid website, I can do that while Kehao answers the next question. There's a place that shows which grant and aids have been funded and which grant and aids have not been funded for every year. I think back to like 2009 or even prior to then, within that grant and aid website, which is really helpful to look at. I would highly recommend doing that when you go in there, because then you get a sense of what's been submitted. And then the advocacy of making sure that you have somebody going in and talking to the legislators and everybody else is really important too, from both the senator side and the rep side, right? City and County of Honolulu has a GIA process also, however, it's very transparent with list of awardees. So yes, I'll definitely get that over to you in the chat shortly. Thank you.
I'm just really excited because I do take for granted that people kind of understand how HCF works, but honestly, a lot of people don't. And this is exciting because I want to be able to help introduce you to HCF beyond the Maui Strong Fund and beyond the scholarship sphere, which are two very important spaces, but HCF is or community foundations generally house funds, right? So people will come and they will start a fund. They have a chunk of money, maybe they inherited it, maybe this is their trust, right? They have a legacy they want to leave. Maybe they're looking for a tax benefit, right? And they start a fund. They can make a private foundation if they have enough money, or they can start a donor advised fund, which means every year they have to spend X amount of dollars based on what they've invested into this fund, and they get to choose who to give that mandatory distribution to, right? So there's no grant application, there's no like waiting for a grant cycle to start. They just go around. Sometimes they go to community events and then they come back to our donor advised philanthropy officer and will say, hey, I really liked this Aloha 808 group. They were awesome. Let's give them $5,000, right? And then a check is cut and it's sent to you, right? There's multiple different kinds of funds that are out there, but one of them is a donor advised fund. We have field of interest funds. So Maui Strong Fund would be considered a field of interest fund because it's specific to like a very unique field or area, right? So those are also some funds maybe you have been a recipient of or not. And then we have our grant cycles, which is generally contracted, like a private foundation will contract us to do their grant making, or we have a pool of funds and then we're using a grant cycle to get that money out. So like the Hawaii Children's Trust Fund is a good example of that. And so these are the different like buckets of funding that you'll find at the community foundation. I would say donor advised funds, they're a little less known, but they're really great if you have fans out there that have a fund and they want to know more about you, and then they're like, okay, great, we like what you do. And so that's like a very elementary description of it, but a great thing for you to know nonetheless. And donor advised funds are only for 501c3 and they must be for a charitable purpose. Because remember, all of this hinges on the IRS. Every distribution from a funder has to be for a charitable purpose. And so donor advised funds will likely always be C3s, whereas fiscal sponsors are more like the fiscal agent to implement a program. The C3 can receive the donation, because of, they just exist and they're doing good work.
All right.
I hope that was helpful.
Super helpful, Kehao. Correct. They cannot use fiscal sponsors for donor advised funds. You have to be a 501c3. But if you're a 501c3, or if you have a partnership with a 501c3, so for instance, Maui United Way is a 501c3, and if Kehao has a donor advised fund at Hawaii Community Foundation, and you wanted to partner with me and I could subcontract you for the work being done, that's a way for it to, it would be a Maui United Way project. We would submit the 501c3 focused application for the donor advised funds, and then we would subcontract. I personally, as I subcontract, I do really think it's important, even within a small community, to make sure that there's an RFQ, like a request for quotations or proposals, making an effort to get 3 bids. You don't always have to go with the lowest bid, but you have to really make sure that you can justify why you're going with who you're going with, so that it shows some equity in the distribution of the funds, that sort of stuff that can really help with audits for your organization in the future as well. And it's just best practice overall. Those are things that you'll definitely have to be doing for state grant and aids and other federal funds. So it's a really great, like I always say that foundations and like private funding streams are a great place to practice, right? Because it's a little bit softer in how the approach of the distribution of funds and the reporting measures are, because it really does get really tight and stringent as you move up the ladder. And that's our hope for all of you, right? Because our funds are here. We really want more funds to be coming in from outside of this community, and that's the goal. Yeah,
I will hold on talking more about these non-application required funds, so that we can hold space for the application specific questions. But I do want to I would love to talk more about that. It's very exciting. But if there are any application specific questions or maybe a roadblock you've hit that you want maybe some help with, definitely take advantage of our tiny little brains that are sitting here geeking out over grant writing.
And also all of the PDFs that have been put into the chat, so that's the slide deck, the grants, do's and don'ts, as well as the sample budget, will all be emailed out to you. Some of you seem to be having difficulty downloading it or seeing it in the chat, so we'll make sure that that happens, and it will be posted up on our Maui United Way grant resources site as well. Any other questions about grant writing do's and don'ts?
Okay, I can help with the question about individuals. And so what that means is that I, Cal Meyer, cannot submit an application on behalf of myself to ask for money, right? So that means I won't be able to say, I'm writing for Maui Strong Fund so that I can buy a new car, right? I, as an individual, will not be given a grant or a scholarship or a stipend from a grant cycle. So when we say that, that's what that means. Individuals don't necessarily aren't considered, staff is a program support, right? So we think about you're funding a program, you need people to get the program done, right? And so that's where those like individual staff persons come in, but they are not asking on behalf of themselves to have that support. Okay.
Let's see. If a 501c3 has several programs, would it be wise to individually apply for them? It depends on how wide the scope of your mission is, right? And so if your mission is we're looking to help Maui fire survivors, right? It might be if there's a fund specific for food security versus mental health, it might make sense to apply for two separate grants, right? If you're looking for just operational costs overall, it could be one. It really depends on what the guidelines of that specific grant that you're applying for are. If it were, for instance, Maui Recovery Funders Collaborative, I would suggest putting it all into one. If it's all specific to fire relief efforts, for instance.
Mm-hmm.
You have to remember too, like, we're not looking for a whole bunch of grants either, right? Like, we want to keep it as simple and as concise as possible, because then there's the administration of that grant that we have to think about. And all of that comes out of our community work that we're doing. And we all have limited bandwidth. So we really want to be thoughtful about how we do things as well, right? And making sure that we can be as succinct as possible in how we organize things to the best of our ability.
And I think to add to that, the deliverables or the outcomes of a successful grant year for those programs, all of them should meet the goal of the funder. So if you have 4 programs, but only 2 of them are related to mental health, and the funder is looking to support mental health, do not include the other 2 that don't support mental health, right? But if you have 2-prong approach to mental health, say you have one is a workshop series and the other is counseling, right? Like both of those programs fit, so you could probably put those together. But if you have a book reading program and then a mental health program, but the book reading program doesn't really fit the fund, don't include it. That could be funded out of somebody else's grant cycle. And then even how is this one offering?
Yeah,
so
I'm
in
looking at Georgia's. Go ahead.
Yeah. So Georgia, I would say we don't know. We are not the experts in knowing the efficacy of one-on-one versus seminar style. If a funder is telling you that what they might be saying is you're spending $50,000 to help 2 people, or you're spending $50,000 to help 50, right? Or 500, that is probably what they're looking at, right? But if you have a data to say, And I believe a seminar style workshop would have a very different outcome and deliverable than a one-on-one approach. It just depends on what your impact is supposed to be, right? If you're saying, we want to make sure people come out of this with XYZ outcome, and you can only get that outcome from a one-to-one, then go all in on your one-to-one, right? There's no way you can get that outcome with this seminar style workshop, right? But it all depends on the what your impact you're trying to make, right? If you're trying to get as many people like introduced to an idea, seminar for sure. But if you want to go deep and narrow on something, all that matters to the funder really is justifying why this and not that. And if they come in and they say, oh, we're not interested because we would rather see a seminar style workshop, then that's a funder preference. But ideally, I'd hope that funder is also like an expert in that space to be making such a specific claim, right? Like I would never tell someone, no, I don't think that's good, right? No, I don't
I
think that's
also
the best
think
way to do it.
that, Georgia, an approach that I might consider, and I did this at Hawaii Nature Center, was like we have groups, right? So we had big group field trips, but then out of those group field trips, or we'd go and do programming at schools, right? During to prepare for to get people connected, to nature and whatnot. What we would do then is find those kids that were most needing or interested in environmental education, other components, and then invite them to apply for scholarships to come to an intersession day camp that's more intensive, right? So it could be a combination. It really, it's an interesting conversation to have with the funder because, like Kehao said, some funders are really interested in the numbers, right? So I call it breadth and depth, right? So there's breadth of approach versus depth of approach. And so it might be like a hybrid combination of both, where you have some workshops and then lead to that one-on-one coaching. Or if you've got that data to show that the one-on-one coaching works better, I also think it's a funder education opportunity, right? To show that data and explain why you're using this approach versus another approach that either you've shown through your own metrics and outcomes and data doesn't work as well, or that data shows that within the field of work that you're working within.
Yeah, that's where the past performance comes in really, really clearly. Yeah. Okay. Atherton Foundation says they fund programs. So strategic planning is interesting, right? That is also a funder specific thing. Atherton might be interested in your strategic plan for arts and culture. And maybe they're not interested in a strategic plan for environmental sciences, right? Focused programming. So that one, I would say, if it's not explicitly written out, like, no, we don't fund this, go ahead and try. Or even call the program officer, right? Call the program officer, ask them, hey, is there history of anyone being supported for strategic planning? If so, do you think it's worth us spending the time on this, right? Because the program officer can run through that Rolodex of the history of grant, reviews they've done for the last few years, and they'll be able to say, you know what, they've done it maybe twice in the last 2 years. You may have a shot, or they've actually never done it in the last 5 years. I wouldn't waste your time, right? They'll know what's best based on the trends and the data they have. Okay. Oh, an LOI. Yeah. So with letters of intent or interest, what I think funders are looking for is to see if the work that you're doing is aligned to the strategies that they're looking to fund specifically, right? And so when you're writing an LOI, be really concise and thoughtful about, this is the problem, this is what we're trying to achieve, and this is how we're going to do it very quickly, right? I think the compelling part is the problem statement, right? And then they look at, what capacity you have to address that problem, because then they'll be able to open up like, the budgets and all the other details, if they invite you for a full application. But it's really making sure upfront that you're like, this is why you need to fund this, because we're doing XYZ. And I always tell people, don't write it like, please fund us. We're such a good organization. It's, you need to fund us because we've done XYZ. This is our past success. This is what we're good at. This is what we know we can do. Come out with a power punch of confidence, and then list, what you think you can accomplish with that funding. Because generally speaking, that's what I've looked for in an LOI.
Right. And then the next question is around if funders have multiple areas of interest, does the proposal need to hone in on one area, or is it beneficial to include all of them? I think it depends on what the work is, right? And so if your proposal and the work that you're and the mission within your organization, because I think that is really an important thing to remember, because mission drift is a thing. And
Yeah.
so if like I said, if a prenatal organization is saying they want to work with Kupuna, that's outside the scope of a mission, right? Of their mission. And so I think being able to make sure that and remember that we during the fires, there's laws that allow nonprofits to work outside of their mission for a period of time after a disaster. But now we're in a space where we have to kind of go back and make sure that we're working within our missions and our zones of genius, right? And allowing for other people to work within theirs. And so I think noting, because I know like Hawaii Community Foundation, a lot of their work, you're checking off, which areas of interest that HCF is, finds a priority do you fall under? And it might be multiple ones. So I would suggest, sharing all of them, but that doesn't mean you need to hit every single one, because again, there's the breadth versus the depth, right? It might be that you're working through one area of interest, but doing a really, really spectacular job in that one space. And that it might only include, work within youth, and that's fine. That doesn't mean you don't have to, necessarily engage, kupuna, for instance, or things like that. So that would be my recommendation, to really, cater that to your specific proposal and the needs that you have within that space, and making sure that you are really highlighting your strengths as an organization and within the work that you're doing for the program that you're asking for.
And we are at time, so I just want to thank everybody. I will stay on and just do a very quick 2 minutes on unique interest funds, but I just wanted to mahalo G for inviting me, Lindsay for being this lovely backbone for the two of us and keeping us on track and supporting this conversation.
Thank you, Kehal. Mahalo, everybody, and I'll stay on as well just to finish up.
Okay. All right. And so just lastly on those unique interest funds. So field of interest funds are just areas that somebody has maybe left a chunk of money and said, like, I would like this money to support brown dogs that live in Waipahu, right? And so we have to go out and find organizations that might fit this specific field of interest. And so the more specific those field of interest funds are, the harder to matchmake is, right? I don't know if you all remember, we did those flex grants years ago. Those were crazy. That was a really wild time. But that was the heart of that, was matchmaking all these little field of interest funds to people based on the work they did, the areas they worked, and who they served, right? Like, so regionally, specifically, their audiences. And so field of interest funds will always be a unique fund that somebody started that has a very specifically outlined purpose. And that's where the matchmaking comes in, right? And so sometimes we'll combine a bunch of field of interest funds and then we'll do a grant cycle to spend it out. Sometimes, it's $5,000 we have to spend for the year. We have to go out and find someone that fits a very sliver of program area. But those are, a lot of community foundations manage these field of interest funds, right? And so that's just one model that's utilized. Okay, I think that's everybody. Thanks again for all your time, and I think this is it.
Thank you all. Have a great rest of your day. We appreciate all that you do in the community, and you have our contact information. Feel free to send us an email if you have any questions or concerns. Take care. Aloha.